Pinkham at the Auto Care Association and Government Affairs. This is our first Advocacy Leader webinar of 2016, and I figured it made sense to kind of use this opportunity to discuss the key issues that the Auto Care Association plans to focus on this year, or I guess will be forced to focus on this year, as that's usually the case. Now, the list I'll provide, keep in mind, is not the end-all, be-all list of issues that will be important to the industry over the next few years, because as many of you know, government is fairly unpredictable, and something can happen this summer or early next year that forces us to learn about an entirely new issue and figure out how we're going to approach that and focus on that. And that could happen at the federal level, or more likely at the state level, especially this year with the election coming up soon, and that will pretty much occupy all of Congress's attention in the next 8 months or so. But even if nothing's getting done in Congress, we're still, we have numerous issues we're monitoring. Some you'll see have been partly resolved, and some we're just kind of beginning to look at. And we have to remain super vigilant and take any new issues in stride kind of as they come up. I'll also add real quickly, in terms of housekeeping, if you have any questions during the discussion, please use the box in the bottom right of your screen, the question box, to write your questions. This presentation is fairly dense. I'll be running through these issues fairly quickly. So if you'd like some more information about something, you can write it there or follow up with me afterwards, and I'll be happy to get you the information, or point you to someone in our department who will have that information. So let's see. Let's get started here. I did a webinar for Yang last summer on kind of describing what we do here in Government Affairs at the Association. And I included these slides to kind of give people an idea of the makeup of our department. I thought they were pretty helpful. So I'm going through the issues. I may mention the staff member who is currently working on a particular issue, and it's just you can kind of put a face to a name. Some of you on the committee or whoever have met some of us, so you already know this, but I'll kind of run through it again real quick. We have 7 full-time staff in our department, 4 in Government Affairs, 3 in International Affairs. There's Aaron Lowe, Senior VP of Regulatory and Government Affairs. He oversees the department, the Government Affairs Department, and he's been with the association for over 30 years. So he knows the industry, DC, the states incredibly well. He spearheaded the right to repair issue for over a decade, and his focus now has kind of shifted to vehicle telematics. So, how is the auto care industry going to make sure that the car companies don't lock out the aftermarket through advances in telematics and other new technologies? Then you have Paul Fiore, Director of Government Affairs. Paul spent many years as an owner-operator of a couple service stations here in Maryland. He then went on to work for the Tire Industry Association, and then came over to us in early 2011. Paul is on Capitol Hill a fair amount, attending fundraisers, meeting with legislators, and he handled a lot of our kind of small business issues, most of which I'll talk about today. Sheila Andrews, Manager of Government Affairs. She came over from the Motorcyclists Association about 3.5 years ago, and similar to Paul, she spends a lot of her time on Capitol Hill. Her main issues are transportation, online sales tax issue, toxic substances. She is also liaison to our heavy-duty segment, HDDA, and is currently pitching our new Auto Care Caucus around Capitol Hill, which we just launched this last fall and are trying to recruit legislators to join. And then you have me, who, as you know, runs the association's grassroots programs, so mobilizing our members to contact their legislators about important issues. I also currently manage the Auto Care Political Action Committee, as well as our various websites, social media, and weekly newsletter, Capitol Report. Moving on to the international side of things, Andres Castrillon is our Senior Counsel for International Affairs. He is a former trade lawyer, or I guess current trade lawyer, however you want to look at it. He came over to us right around the same time Sheila did, back in 2012. He's obviously an expert when it comes to trade issues, and he continues to work with our members, not only on importing parts, but opening up new markets for export opportunities, I guess is how we would put it. And he is the liaison to our international segment, AIA, as well as the newly formed International Trade Committee. And since he's been here, he's brought a few people on board, including Angela Chang, who is actually fluent in Mandarin, and she has been assisting the association's international projects for a couple of years now. And then recently, Carolina Aragontes. She's relatively new to the team. The association, I don't know if you guys heard, recently won a federal grant to pursue opportunities for our industry in Latin America. I know Carolina, being that she's from Columbia, will be a great help in those efforts. So quite the eclectic team. So let's get into the issues. Again, I'll be touching on a lot of issues, and to kind of help you categorize them in your heads, I've separated them into two buckets. One I call business issues. So these are issues that we are concerned with because our membership is obviously comprised of American businesses. And these issues affect every type of business in some way. Our strategy and how we approach these, though, is slightly different than how we approach our more industry-specific issues, which is the next bucket of issues. So these issues are issues that predominantly impact our industry, the auto care industry. So we are generally the leading group, or at least one of the leading groups, when it comes to these issues, and these are, kind of what we spend the majority of our time on, because being that we're the national association representing the industry, if we don't get involved, nobody will, or other smaller groups will. Things like telematics, right to repair, vehicle warranty rights. These are issues that our industry specifically needs to address in order to compete within kind of the broader automotive sector. So first, I want to, talk about get into the business issues I mentioned. There's a bunch of them, and as I said, they're pretty broad. The way that we usually approach these is that in DC, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of what we call coalitions that make up every side of the major issues. So, for instance, healthcare, very widespread controversial issue. We belong to a few coalitions working to change key elements of the Affordable Care Act to make it more business-friendly. Through these coalitions, we sign letters, we meet with legislators, we try to get our members involved, and everyone in the coalition, which is made up of dozens or hundreds of representatives from other industries, are all working kind of towards the same goal. In terms of healthcare, as it pertains to our industry, things have obviously slowed down a little bit compared to 4 or 5 years ago, when this was the issue. But there are a few recent updates I think worth mentioning. Bit of background first. The Affordable Care Act was signed into law in 2010 with the assumption that by increasing overall insurance coverage, the quality, affordability, and accessibility of healthcare would increase as well. The bill uses regulatory measures like mandates, exchanges, subsidies, all things talked about frequently if you watch a lot of cable news. And it also establishes certain standards for coverage, such as saying that insurance companies can't deny people insurance because they have pre-existing conditions. Now, I mentioned we at the association belong to a few small business coalitions that are fighting to prevent certain anti-business aspects of the law from going into effect. One, for instance, is the employer mandate, which requires businesses with a certain number of full-time employees to provide insurance for their workers. My colleague Paul, who I mentioned, he's been attending meetings with legislators fairly frequently over the last few years to discuss the employer mandate, along with other provisions of the law like the health insurance tax, the Catalytic tax, small market cap. And if you're just a casual advocate, observer of these things, you really don't have to know what each of these things are unless you handle your business's HR and accounting matters, which in that case you absolutely should understand what these mean because they're going to have a huge impact on your business. But our overall position is basically this. Any part of the law that increases costs or regulatory burdens on our member companies, we are opposed to. I mentioned real quickly that there were a couple recent developments. The PACE Act, PACE stands for Protecting Affordable Coverage for Employees Act. It was signed into law last year, which was definitely a victory for us. The PACE Act basically prevented the small group market from expanding to include plans from 50 to 100 employees. The health insurance tax and Catalytic tax were both delayed at the end of last year as part of the Paul Ryan's omnibus spending bill, which again were small victories for our side. And then so, like I said, to quickly sum up, we realize that full repeal of the Affordable Care Act at this point is pretty unlikely, but there are areas where we can make recommendations to improve the law and kind of lessen the burden on small businesses, and that's kind of been our strategy for some time now. So labor. Our overall strategy in this area has been to pretty much challenge most of what the National Labor Relations Board does. The NLRB's agenda under this administration has been to pass rules that make it easier for employees to unionize through notices, what you can and can't say, secret ballots, snap elections, and this concept of micro-union. So like you just had the shoe department at Macy's, trying to unionize, right? The last bullet under NLRB, joint employer, is a biggie. It's a fairly recent issue. And that's to do with a ruling by the NLRB last summer that said that corporate entities and franchises, such as major restaurant chains, is a good example of that, could be forced to negotiate with unions or potentially be held liable for any labor law violations that happen at their franchise locations. So we're obviously opposed to that ruling, that interpretation, and we attempted to get that fixed end of last year as part of the omnibus spending bill, but it didn't happen. I'll mention quickly that we work with a group called the Coalition for a Democratic Workplace, which tries through both Congress and the courts to kind of undo many of the things done by the NLRB. And there's also the Department of Labor's new overtime rule, which if you were on the call last summer, Paul talked about a little bit more in depth, but hopefully everyone's familiar with the concept that employees who meet a certain salary level are exempted from qualifying for overtime. This would essentially double that threshold from 23.6 to over 50,000 and index it for inflation. So obviously, huge implications for our industry, and we should kind of know more about how that's going to shake out in the coming months. So taxes, very broad issue, obviously. There are a few key components we tend to focus on. Similar to the labor issue, we're concerned about the same things as many other associations and business groups. We recognize there needs to be comprehensive tax reform that addresses the disparity between taxes on small business and corporate taxes. That's the fair effective tax rate. We realize that we agree with the idea that the tax code needs to be simpler with fewer loopholes. I seriously doubt that tax reform will be taken up this year in Congress, but it is something to keep an eye on because certain provisions that do benefit our industry might be cut in negotiations. For instance, LIFO, the last in, first out accounting method, which many of our WD members still use. We believe that should be preserved because repealing it could force these companies to pay extremely high restitution costs, as Paul puts it. So, and then we support repealing the estate tax or the death tax, as it's called by its critics. This is the money the government takes from you when you die. Oh, excuse me, jumped ahead there. And we support the Remote Transactions Parity Act, HR 2775. So this was formerly the Marketplace Fairness Act, which is the online sales tax issue. Our position is that internet retailers have a significant advantage over brick and mortar businesses because they do not have to collect, a state sales tax. This act levels that playing field and allows the states to start collecting that lost revenue. Transportation infrastructure, even though, I guess I'll say, even though our industry is considered by many to be kind of a transportation-related industry, I still include this, within kind of the broader business issue category because, really all businesses need a sound infrastructure to operate for the most part. This issue has always been about the Highway Trust Fund. How do we, how do we pay for federal transportation programs and our highways and all that? The main source of revenue for the Highway Trust Fund is the federal gas tax, which currently sits at 18.4 cents per gallon. The tax has not been increased since 1993. So as you can imagine, with construction costs obviously rising over the last 23 years, the trust fund is no longer getting the adequate funding that it needs. We at the association actually support an increase to the gas tax in order to fund these highway projects. That's something that our Government Affairs Committee and Board approved a few years back. But recently, we actually did have a victory just this past year with Congress coming together to agree on a new 5-year, $305 billion transportation funding bill. The gas tax was not increased, but Congress was able to find other mechanisms, as they usually do, to kind of account for the new spending. And this is the first long-term transportation bill in a while. Before this, it was just kind of a series of short-term stopgap measures. So it's encouraging to kind of see Congress finally approve something that we think will benefit all industries for years to come. Environmental chemical regulations. So these are fairly complex, and I would encourage you, if you deal in this or if you have questions about any issue relating to chemicals or environmental regulations, to contact my colleague Sheila Andrews. I mentioned her in that first slide, who she can provide kind of more specific guidance in this area. But just to kind of introduce you to this category of issues, we attack these at both the state and the federal level. Oftentimes, if it's at the state level, it's in California. As you'll see below, some of those listed are in California. California, as many of you probably know, is the most proactive state in terms of regulations, especially ones impacting the environment. But we did make progress this past year, for example, at the federal level with TSCA reform, the Toxic Substances Control Act. It passed both the House and Senate, pretty much unanimous approval. It's now in conference, which means that they have to come to a final compromise bill, and then the bill gets voted on again and then goes to the president for his signing. Like I said, many industries have kind of been lobbying for that for a while, so it was good to see that get done, or most of the way done. GHS hazard warning, so which were adopted by OSHA for kind of U.S. regulation purposes, and this isn't really an actionable item as it's already kind of been finalized, but Sheila requested I include this in here to kind of remind manufacturers that I think as of last year, there's a new labeling standard that you have to follow. And California Prop 65. So this has been an issue for us for a while. California is trying to make changes to the standard to Prop 65, which again has to do with kind of labeling products, and we have a number of positions on this issue, including exempting an exemption for auto parts, I think specifically aftermarket parts, and then also altering some of the proposed labels and notifications that are part of the law. And then California Assembly Bill 708. This actually just came up for a vote, I think last month, and it was defeated, which was good for the industry. This legislation would have really ramped up labeling requirements, I think, made it so that every single ingredient in every product would have to be listed on the product's label, which is pretty crazy, but that was defeated. And then international trade. So again, a lot has happened in this area in the past year or so since the last time we talked about this, but to run through them real quickly, the Export-Import Bank, which we supported, did end up getting renewed this past year. It went dormant for a while and then got renewed, I think, as part of the end-year spending bill as well. The bank offers financing plans to businesses who wish to export products. We supported Trade Promotion Authority, TPA, also known as Fast Track Authority, which was passed by Congress last year as well. TPA essentially grants the president the ability to negotiate trade deals with other countries and then bring them before Congress for an up or down vote. So that's what you need essentially before any major free trade agreements can be approved. And on that note, in terms of kind of what's hot in the streets now are these free trade agreements. We generally support new free trade agreements as they open up new markets for our members and reduce burdens on those already doing business in those markets. The Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP, you probably heard about recently a fair amount, includes a number of Asian countries, not China though, as well as Canada and Mexico. And that was finalized last year by the respective countries, but it still has to be approved by Congress and the other countries involved before it can kind of finally go into effect. There's also the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, or TTIP, which is an agreement between the U.S. and European Union, and that's still very much in the works, so a couple of years out from that, I believe. Last year, another issue, last year we had a slowdown at the West Coast ports because of the shipping companies and the dock workers couldn't come to a collective bargaining agreement. This affected pretty much every one of our members who were trying to get product into the country. An agreement was eventually made, but we obviously kind of want legislative or regulatory measures in place moving forward to keep these things from happening in the future. And then finally, just kind of broadly, through our international efforts, we support educating international stakeholders about our industry and kind of opening up new markets for our members. And I mentioned that federal grant that Andres and his team recently secured. That'll play a major role in this area, and the link I included there is to read more about the trade missions we have coming up this year. So now let me get into more of the industry-specific issues, which, like I said, we spend a lot of our time on. So first of all, vehicle telematics. We see this as the next major issue for our industry. I'm sure you've heard a fair amount about it recently. Certain telematics technologies like OnStar have been around for a number of years, but now you're seeing it much more frequently, and it's becoming, it's being touted kind of as the next big thing in the automotive sector. I listed some examples here of technologies that are classified as telematics and kind of highlighted the last two here, which we think will pose the most significant risk to our industry. So for example, you're driving down the road and you get an alert on your nav screen, your dashboard that says, "Hi, David, your oil is near the end of its useful life. Touch here to make a convenient appointment at your dealership." I think Aaron's given that example in the past. As you can imagine, that would be disastrous for independent service shops, right? Our position is that car owners should have a choice when it comes to where their personal data and where that information produced by their car is being sent. As I said, our senior VP, Aaron Lowe, has been following this issue for some time, and he is working kind of with all the appropriate parties, including the OEs, to try to come to some sort of resolution on this. And I know they're still in talks. We're kind of at a crossroads right now, but expect to hear kind of more about this issue throughout the year. Right to repair. So I'll quickly touch on this, even though it's technically been resolved. Aaron and others pushed for right to repair legislation in Congress for over a decade. We saw that cars were becoming more and more computerized, and we knew that we needed a solution that would allow independent service shops to continue to repair new vehicles. And we weren't getting a ton of traction in Congress. So back in 2012, we pursued legislation in Massachusetts to attempt to force the automakers to come to the table for negotiations on this issue. We ended up actually putting a question on the state ballot that November in 2012 presidential election, and we received 86% in favor. So huge victory for us in the industry in Massachusetts. And this definitely got the automakers' attention. They knew we had a winning issue, from the consumer standpoint, and didn't want to kind of fight this state by state. So they came to the table, and we were able to kind of work out a national deal, a memorandum of understanding, or MOU, as we call it, that would implement the main principles of right to repair nationwide. Now, we're still only a couple of years out from the agreement, early stages of this, and we have to kind of wait and see how enforcement will shake out, because this is just an agreement. It's not binding legislation or anything. But the car companies know that that we can always take this, always back out of the deal and take this fight to other states. So Magnuson-Moss Warranty Act. This is a very interesting issue for us. It's gotten some steam in the past year or so. And our members, our members get incredibly riled up about this issue because, similar to telematics and right to repair, it has to do with the car companies and dealers misleading our consumers. And we see this type of stuff all the time. The Magnuson-Moss Warranty Act was passed in 1975 to keep manufacturers, not just for vehicles, but all consumer products, from conditioning warranties on the use of OE parts and service. However, as you can probably guess, we have seen many, many violations of this by the OEs and the dealers. They'll say things like, if you purchase a non-OE oil filter, your warranty is voided. They'll give that notice to a customer. To put it simply, that's pretty illegal, and we've been, pressuring the Federal Trade Commission, who's responsible for enforcing the law, to step in and take action. Last year, BMW Mini had to settle with the FTC for telling customers that BMW would void their warranty unless they used Mini parts and Mini dealers to perform maintenance and repair work. Obviously, a very clear violation, so we were happy to see the FTC take action there. And then last summer, the FTC released results from its review. Every so often, regulations are reviewed, laws are reviewed by the various agencies, and they reviewed the Magnuson-Moss Warranty Act, and they did clarify some things, but it didn't really go kind of as far as we wanted them to. So what's interesting now is this fight's kind of been taken to the states a little bit, and our focus has shifted to what we were calling the Connecticut model. So a bit of background, last year, a state senator from Connecticut, on his own accord, introduced and passed legislation that required language of the Magnuson-Moss Warranty Act be included by the new car dealership at the point of sale of a new vehicle. And we saw this as kind of a small but important step in keeping car owners informed of their rights, their warranty rights under the law. We've since tried to take this model provision to other states like Massachusetts, California, New Jersey, and Florida, and the car companies and dealers are now kind of caught on to this, and are putting pretty much everything they've got into defeating these measures. If anyone on the call wants to, get a glimpse of the true colors of our opposition, I'm sure many of you are familiar, but especially at the state level, look no further than this issue. I mean, it's really starting to get very messy in some of these states, and we're going to have to kind of see how far we can take this. Crash parts state bills. So another fascinating issue we've been following for a while now, and are these state crash parts bills, which keep popping up. We actually had one almost come to a vote in Michigan last week but we were able to kind of keep that from happening, and thanks to action from our membership and other various stakeholders, LKQ and such. Essentially, these bills have to do with the ongoing battle between body shops and insurance companies. The language in these bills makes reference to aftermarket crash parts and in some way tries to make the point that aftermarket parts are of an inferior quality to OEM parts. Obviously, the automakers and dealers, they love these bills. They jump aboard, and even groups like ASA, the Automotive Service Association, are in support of them as well. But up until this point, I think we've had pretty much, pretty strong success in defeating these bills as they come up. Our argument is that, while the language generally only applies to crash parts in these cases, the anti-aftermarket language in them is concerning, and it would be, easy for, the legislature or whoever, whatever state, to expand restrictions to all aftermarket parts in the future. And then lastly, I'll touch on this real quick, catalytic converters. For a couple of years now, we've been working with some of our manufacturer members who develop aftermarket catalytic converters to try and curb a trend we're seeing where states are trying to adopt the converter regulations in place in California, which are by far the strictest in the country. And while there hasn't been much enforcement that we've seen in New York up until this point, I think it went into effect in January 2014. The CARB-approved converters are more expensive, and our opinion is that rather than have different regulations in different states, we are currently trying to lobby the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, for a single regulation pertaining to aftermarket converters nationwide. So there's consistency in the market for our manufacturer and distributor members, because right now in New York it's kind of a hot mess. And I don't want to get too in the weeds with this and kind of where we stand, but just know that it's an ongoing process to try to get the EPA kind of on board with what we're trying to do. And if you want to get involved or learn more about this issue, reach out to my colleague Paul Fiore. Again, his contact information at the beginning of the presentation, and he can fill you in on all the details. So that's kind of where we're at. As I said, there are other issues that may spring up, and we'll have to address, and which we're obviously prepared to do. One of the things I've maintained from the beginning is that I want you all to kind of be our eyes and ears on the ground as we go throughout the year. And if you get wind of any issues and can provide an example of how this particular issue is affecting your business or somebody else, one of your customers, whatever it is, we love that kind of intel. So just we appreciate all the information you can share with us in specific cases. It helps us do our jobs. So I'll finish off with this. So quickly, how can you get involved and why is it important? I also included these slides in our presentation into Yang last year, and I figured I'd incorporate them here as well, just as kind of a refresher. This slide talks about the relationship between constituents and legislators. I think most of you are pretty familiar with that. And this, I got a little bit of a busier slide here that digs deeper into kind of why advocacy is important and tips on how to create kind of an effective message that's persuasive and that legislators will listen to. And Adam from Aristotle, I know he's going to be presenting to us next time at our next call. He's spoken on some of our previous calls as well, has presented this slide before, and I figured it's always good to kind of revisit to remind everyone that not all advocacy is created equal. In order to make our voices heard and really move the needle, we have to put in extra effort and reach out personally to our legislators. And if you have the opportunity, obviously, a face-to-face meeting is still the most effective type of advocacy. Here's a kind of a wrap-up slide as well that shows kind of the two programs we offer members for getting involved in our government affairs efforts. Of course, the Advocacy Leadership Team, which most, if not, I think all of you are a part of. And then there's the Auto Care Protocol Action Committee, which is the fundraising arm of what we do. I know there's already a lot of overlap between the two groups right now, but if you would like to hear more about ACPAC, our Political Action Committee, just reach out to me. Happy to provide you with information on that. And then finally, shameless pitch here on this new feature on our website. I've included this is a slide highlighting our economic impact map, which is free to everyone and available on our website. Like I said, you are now able to go down to the county level in addition to state and district level to find the number of, for instance, auto care jobs or economic output in any region, county, state district, congressional district, state, whatever it is. And this information, is incredibly useful in meetings with legislators because it kind of shows the true, impact and reach of our industry down to the specific area. And legislative offices, they love numbers, and whenever you're able to kind of quantify anything, the more seriously they will take what you're saying. So with that, I will answer any questions. I don't see any questions right now. There was a lot of information to kind of run through real quick. But if anyone has any questions, you can feel free to write those now. I'll say real quick that you know, if you have any questions that come to you after this, definitely feel free to reach out, email me. I can connect you with the person who kind of handles that issue, whether it's me or somebody else. And yeah, we'll end things there. Thank you again to everyone for listening in today. I hope you found it helpful, and I will obviously be distributing this presentation along with the recording, probably in an email either tomorrow or next week as kind of a follow-up to this. And before I forget, as I referenced, we have another call exactly 2 weeks from today, where we'll talk about, you know, how, you know, being that it's an election year, all the kind of advocacy opportunities that are available to you. You know, the congressmen will be spending a lot more time back home in their districts and states and whatever, so how to kind of take advantage of that. And hopefully you can join us for that call as well. And with that, I hope you have a great rest of the week, and I look forward to talking to all of you again soon. Thanks.